Cool. Welcome to the Thought Experiment. And on today's episode of the Thought Experiment, I'm actually sitting down with someone who chose a totally different career path to myself or even any of my previous guests. I'm actually going to be sitting down with someone who chose to become an educator, who chose the more teaching path. And we will be tackling some of the ideas around what he sees happening in the education system, what he feels like we are perhaps getting right, what perhaps we are getting wrong, where the opportunities are, and how we can perhaps resolve some of those ideas. So TJ, welcome to the Thought Experiment.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I think we spoke offline, and one of the things that I discussed with you, I said to you, part of my thinking around actually these sit downs have been around, I want to get into some of the thinking that some people that I really find interesting have about some of the ideas that I think are important within the context of Africa, but also specifically South Africa. And so you are one of those people that I looked at the path that you've chosen in your career. It has been quite interesting because it doesn't necessarily begin with you. I saw you posted your results from last year. You didn't start there.
No.
Those are those are definitely not your metric results.
Yeah.
So I think let's get it kicked off from here. I'm with you in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Who is TJ in high school?
Oh my goodness. Okay. TJ in high school is not TJ. He is Taelo, right? Okay. So TJ is this uptight teenager. Okay. He doesn't get involved in anything. He goes to school. He goes to church after school and then goes back home. That's it. No partying, no hanging out, nothing. Just school, church, home. That's it. And TJ is an overachiever in high school, actually. So all of this actually started in high school. Mm-hmm. Yes, the results were not the same. They were even of a higher standard in high school. Mm-hmm. So I started laying the foundation way before high school, and then working my way to high school, getting into high school, and continuing like that, continuing with the standard. So TJ in high school is the president of the SRC. He doesn't engage with anyone, no girls, nothing like that. He's just purely academic, focused. He reads a lot. He wins all sorts of competitions, goes to the ESCOM Science Expo. He goes to competitions like the Department of Water Affairs competition. He wins all sorts of essay writing competitions. And in all of this, he doesn't really understand what he wants to do. He doesn't really understand how to deal with all of this and what to do with all of these accomplishments. So that's TJ in high school.
Awesome. Okay, so moving from that, then how do you end up studying what you studied? Because I think if you did relatively well and you took part in science expos, I mean, I was less than interested in school. The only question I had when I arrived in the morning at school was, what time is break? So I wasn't interested in school at all. I somehow still managed to do relatively well, but I wasn't interested in it at all. It didn't interest me. I felt like I was wasting my time. So I'm interested in this because you seem to have this focus on your academics pretty early on. Mm-hmm. So I think before we get to how do you then arrive at studying what you've studied, where did that come from? Where did that focus on your academics actually come from? Because that's pretty unusual.
Yeah, it is. I think I should first start by saying we deal with a whole lot of things, especially as teenagers, we tend to sometimes not take into consideration exactly what teenagers go through. And it's a lot. It's a lot for some of them.
Yeah.
So this focus and determination and discipline came from a very dark place. I come from a very dark place. My upbringing was decent. I have a hardworking mother. She separated with my father when I was around 9, 10.
Okay.
And the divorce scarred me. It really did scar me emotionally. I didn't know how to deal with it, but all I knew was that I had to find a way to channel all of this energy and all of this frustration. So I just thought to myself that it would be more beneficial to me if I found a more positive avenue, a more positive outlet. And that outlet just so happened to be academics, because throughout my upbringing, my mother would bring books for me to read, encyclopedias, scientific encyclopedias, and literature books that she kept from her high school years. So I'd read the likes of Shakespeare, and that's where my interest in the English language came from. And all those encyclopedias just channeled me into the technical stream. Hence, I took pure mathematics and physics and technical drawing and all those subjects. So the discipline came from there. The fact that I have a single mother, she rarely ever has time for us because she has to work to put food on the table. And my dad at the time didn't seem to be interested in, well, taking care of us or in any sort of relationship, because he later got married and he started his own family, and he just didn't have time for us. So I just thought to myself, okay, since this gentleman doesn't have time for me, let me just find something to keep me busy, you know? And I think it was a way of finding solace in a way. So I found solace and comfort in academics, in books, in reading stories that are similar to mine, you know, immersing myself in literature, trying to understand how the world works, how to deal with all this frustration, not understanding what's happening around me. And yeah, it helped me a lot.
That's interesting. Okay, I think you're the next. You're the second person that I'm actually sitting down with, where things don't necessarily go as planned in their upbringing, and that moves them in the right direction. You know, like that actually moves them in the direction of trying to make something of their life, work through their academics and whatever. It's like that pushes them in that direction. But we all know this. That's not the normal course. You know, more often than not, the direction goes the other way, where they don't care about anything. Like they don't care about their lives. They don't care. You know, so why is that the case? Like, why do you think you ended up in this one direction and many others who perhaps had a similar upbringing ended up in a totally different direction, where they're turning to crime, they're doing all of these other things? Why do you actually think you chose this other direction versus the other one?
You know, I often say it would be remiss of me to tell my life story without mentioning the fact that even though my mother wasn't physically present for most of the time, whenever she got the time to speak to us, she really did take the time to spell out exactly how we should do what we want to do, right? So she wasn't the type of person, and she still isn't the type of person who would force you to do something, but she mostly wants to reason with you. She wants to understand your thinking process, and to try and steer you away from trouble.
Okay.
Ever so gently, she would sit me down and she would mention all the mistakes she did in her life. And she would sort of try to take from those mistakes the knowledge that she's learned and deliver it to me. So she would tell me, listen to me. I know as a teenager, you face a lot of trouble. You're faced with a whole lot of uncertainties. Your hormones are raging. I know that. But don't ever put yourself in a situation that you will regret later. There are so many people who've done such and such because they thought it would benefit them, or maybe they were doing it out of anger. I know my separation with your father, she didn't go into detail about this, why it happened. She'd always say she also doesn't know what happened. But she'd say to me, I know the separation didn't treat you well, or maybe you haven't processed it yet, but don't ever do things out of anger. He's still your father. If ever you want to meet up with him, you want to speak to him, speak to me and I'll arrange the meeting. If ever you're dealing with something that you don't understand, come speak to me. Feel free to speak to me. So I think my mother having opened that line of communication and establishing it from the very beginning helped me to deal with whatever I was dealing with at the time. So for me, having a mother who wasn't judgmental and who was, more importantly, spiritual, helped me a lot, because she was also the first person to say to me, I'm unable to raise you kids by myself. Everything that you see me do now is because I draw strength from God. So that spiritual foundation that she laid helped me a lot, because even to this day, whenever I have problems, the first person I run to, or the first entity I run to, is God. So that helped me a lot. I don't know what other people believe in, but for me, my mother instilled that understanding that there's a higher power who you can go to whenever you're inundated with like a whole lot of challenges, a whole lot of information that you don't know what to do. This entity is there to help you. So that's it. That's what helped me find a way to sort of channel this energy and use it for good.
That's interesting. That's actually very interesting, because and then it's actually an interesting way in which your mom actually handled the issue. And I think that might be part of what helped you take a different route. I'm not sure if she was different, like if it had impacted her negatively, where perhaps she wasn't spiritual, she was, let's say she had given herself over to some form of addiction, whether it be alcohol or drugs, whether the outcome would have been the same, but I think we won't belabor that aspect of it. So, okay, so we figure out where now you get this idea of focusing on your academics. It's more of it's more of a place to hide than it is a genuine interest in school. You're trying to find a place where you can comfort yourself and whatever. So the drive then begins to make sense. And then that's you in high school, that's your early upbringing. And then how do you then arrive at deciding to then go and study teaching?
So funny story, right? It didn't start with me exiting high school and then thinking to myself, you know what, teaching is a viable option.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, I was a top achiever in high school. So coming out of high school, I came out with 7 distinctions, right? And having those distinctions said to me, you know what, you can do anything anything you want to do, right? And the community also fueled this and said to me, 7 distinctions, go and do actuarial science or whatever it is that brings you a whole lot of money. And my mother at the time, funny enough, didn't have anything to do with this. She didn't prescribe to me what I should study or what I should register for. But because of the fact that I took civil technology in high school as a technical subject, and I found it interesting. I genuinely found it interesting. The fact that you could be involved in a project to build something and look at it later on and think to yourself, I was part of that. I found that interesting. I found that idea interesting. Looking at the buildings, just the architecture, it was appealing to me. So I later applied to WITS, the University of the Witwatersrand, to study civil technology, civil engineering, not understanding that there's a huge difference between civil technology and civil engineering. So I went to the University of the Witwatersrand, did my first year. I wasn't failing at the time, and everything seemed to be going well. But round about July, August, something happened. I don't know what exactly happened, but my mind shifted, because it seemed to me that at the time, everything that I'd known to be true and everything that I'd centered my life around was all of a sudden changing, as though my eyes were being opened to something new, some new reality. The church that I went to at the time, I won't mention the name, got involved in a whole lot of scandal. And the pastor was, like the head pastor was separating with his wife. And to me, because I looked up to this man and took him sort of as a father figure, to me, it seemed like history was repeating itself all over again. Okay. So I then thought to myself, okay, having shifted my focus from my father and taking this man as my father figure and having the same thing or a similar thing happen to him that happened to my father, what does this mean about everything I've taken as true and that I've found solace in, that I've found comfort in? Does it mean that everything he said is not true? Because when a scandal happens, there's a whole lot of other things that come into play and a whole lot of other scandals come into play. So you start questioning a whole lot of things that you were taught. And at the time, it seemed like the foundation itself was crumbling. So I didn't have anything to stand on. So I became depressed and I contemplated deregistering from the University of the Witwatersrand. At the time, I had a sponsor who was also my mentor, a man who worked for WBHO, the construction company.
Yeah.
And I called him, explaining to him what I was going through. And unfortunately, when I called him, I had already deregistered. So I was explaining to him what had happened in retrospect, to say that I was feeling despondent, I was feeling depressed. And so I decided to deregister because I thought to myself, it would be easier to deregister now instead of facing failure later on, because I'd never failed throughout my my schooling years. So it was fear of failure, partly fear of failure, that made me deregister. And also because of the fact that I felt like I couldn't go on, because engineering is the type of course that requires you to know what you had done previously. So the modules build on one another. So you have to understand the basic principles of mathematics before you can go and do the other modules later on.
Yeah.
So I felt as though I was far behind and that I wouldn't be able to catch up. Especially when they started bringing in your integral science and differential calculus. I was so depressed at the time. I was so depressed. I didn't know how to deal with all that pressure. So yeah, I decided to deregister, and then I went to work. This was 2014. Mm-hmm. And then I went to work the next year. For the whole year, I worked with WBHO in Group 5, building Mall of Africa. Oh, okay. So my sponsor and mentor, because he worked for WBHO, spoke to some of his superiors to say there's this young man who's found himself in a difficult situation. Could we help him? So I managed to get a job as a quality assurance assistant. Okay. And I was staying on site. Every morning, I would go to the offices on the other side of the building, and then later on, go back to hostel. So yeah, my work comprised of going to site and checking the quality of the concrete, whether there's honeycombing, all of that stuff. And during that time, the whole of 2015 was a time for me to reflect on what I actually wanted to do. So doing this work of like meeting with civil engineers and site agents sort of exposed me to the actual work, realizing that we don't actually apply the maths we study in varsity and all of that complex calculation made me to want to go back to the University of the Witwatersrand and complete what I'd started. So then I registered again in 2016 to complete my first year because I had deregistered, right? Yeah. So I went back, completed my first year, got credit for the modules I'd passed. And I passed my first year in 2016, my second first year. And then I went and did my second year in 2017. And that's when things started getting real again. The mathematics just wasn't, it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. So we got introduced to a higher level of differential calculus with all the integral signs and having to apply the maths that we were taught in first year. So getting into that, and I remember there was a module called environmental engineering. Okay. And I didn't understand what was happening because you'd get given certain variables, but then there's some other variables that are missing and you have to work them out. I just found it frustrating. Mm. And I think also the fact that I didn't really get grasp of the foundational principles. I didn't know how to apply what I learned. Okay. So not having learned to think and how to sort of apply what I've learned, I struggled a lot. And so I became depressed. There's a center at the University of the Witwatersrand called CCDU, okay. Where you go if you're feeling anxious or depressed or whatever, and you speak to someone. But every time I went there, I felt as though it's making things worse. Because yes, they'd have a box of Kleenex tissues there, I'd cry, and then I'd go back to my room, and then the cycle would continue. Because then when I go back to my room, the therapist isn't there. I have no one to talk to, right? I'm only faced with all these symbols, all these mathematical symbols that I somehow have to work through. We did have tutorials, but they weren't helping, because I think also the fact that I'd lost passion. I didn't have passion. I didn't have something to look forward to. Sort of derailed my progress. So yes, I failed most of the modules in second year. And that's when I spoke to my friend at the time, Nelson Matsuma, and he was going through the same thing. And we sort of counseled one another. So he was like a confidant. And through that process of speaking to one another and realizing that we sort of have similar paths, he went to the same church, funny enough, and he was also depressed because of the fact that all of these scandals seemed to be showing up, and he was questioning his whole existence. So I think having an existential crisis at that time in our lives was depressing, because we were young. We were so young, and we thought to ourselves, if we're going through this now, what's going to happen later on? So he decided earlier to say, you know what, I'm not going to stress myself. I'm not even going to write the exam. I'm just going to register or apply to the University of Johannesburg to study teaching. So he had already made up his mind around June or so. And throughout this time, yes, he'd go to class, I'd see him, would speak. I was still committed at the time to academics, and trying to sort of find a balance between my social life and academics. Because remember, in high school, I sort of didn't have a social life, right? My life was purely academic, and I'd go to church. So getting to varsity and having to sort of fend for myself, my mother wasn't there. So I had to learn certain things on my own, including establishing relationships with ladies, right? And yeah, no, it showed me flames, to say the least. I know. It showed me flames.
Yeah.
So yeah, going through all of that, all at the same time, was frustrating for me. And so later on, I decided to also apply to University of Johannesburg, but I applied for the same course, civil engineering.
Okay.
Thinking to myself, I think the dominating idea in my mind was that I don't want to let go of something I've started. I want to continue. I want to at least try to prove to myself that I did try, so that later on, I don't think to myself, I could have been graduating a qualified civil engineer. I didn't want that thought in my mind. So I just thought, I just thought to myself, you know what, I need to complete this. I need to do everything in my power to prove to myself that I can actually do this. So I applied again for civil engineering, but then I went home and showed my mother the results to say, listen, I failed 6 modules, 3 in the first semester, 3 in the second semester. At the time, I wasn't depressed, because I thought to myself, you know what, I gave it my all. It didn't work out. I have to find a way to make it work later on. So I think at that time, that spirit of resilience and endurance was being established. Learning how to fail forward, learning how to take lessons from my supposed failures and using them to inform future success. So when I got home and I spoke to my mother, my mother's amazing. She's the wisest woman I've ever known. She sat me down and explained to me, listen, when you came out of high school and you decided to do civil engineering, I didn't dictate to you what to do. I didn't tell you to choose civil engineering. And now I feel the need to, as a mother, step in and advise you, because at the beginning, I didn't want you to think I'm dictating what your life should be. So at this point in time, ngwanaka, ke kopa o nkutlwelle. Find a way of going back in time and pinning down that one thing that you found passion in. I remember when you were explaining to me certain principles, certain mathematical principles back in high school. I've never understood math. This is my mom speaking. I've never understood mathematics, but at the time, when you were explaining those principles, I understood exactly what you were saying. And I felt as though I could go and study mathematics and actually understand what I'm doing. So she said to me, I think you should go into teaching because you have this way of explaining things such that people understand exactly what you're saying. So I think for now, go into teaching and choose whatever subject you find interest in, and you'll take it from there. So at that time, I decided to listen to her. I went back to the University of Johannesburg, UJ, and at the time, I didn't have accommodation. I didn't have any money. I just came to Johannesburg from Northwest Rustenburg to say to them, could you please change my qualification from engineering to teaching, to education? And in doing so, may I please have English and any other subject as a major? And this is what most people who knew me didn't understand. Why I'd move from engineering in the first place, but not even that, why I would take English instead of mathematics and physics as my majors. And this comes from what my mother had said to me, to say, find a subject that you've always found interesting and major in that subject. And going back to my high school years, I always remembered how Ms. Kirsten would come to class well prepared. Her documents were arranged properly, and she knew exactly what she was doing. And she instilled that interest in me. At one point, actually, she came to me the day before applications were closing for their Boxer Youth Leadership Program for this essay writing competition. And she said to me, Thabiso, please write an essay on this topic. There's a competition, they're closing tomorrow. I understand there's a lot of pressure, but take your time. Take your time to write this essay, and then by tomorrow morning, you hand it to me. I will help you edit it, and we'll send it through. We sent through the application, and I actually won the competition. And I was taken in with some other students to go to Suela Zimbili in KwaZulu-Natal for a leadership program. Okay. So remembering all of that, how I always came to class prepared, how she aroused interest in me, I just thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to forget everyone's expectations. I'm going to put everything aside and I'm just going to do me. So even the lady who was helping me register and helping me choose subjects was saying to me, I'm looking at your matric certificate and I see you have a level 7 for physics, a level 6 for mathematics. Are you sure you don't want to take mathematics and physics as your majors? because you are more than qualified. And I remember saying to her, I know that's not a true reflection of what I'm capable of. Moreover, those are not the subjects I'm most passionate about. So could you please register me for English and any other subject? And she showed me the combination, and I happened to take ICT support specialist, school ICT support specialist as my second major. So that's how I went from studying civil engineering to changing to the University of Johannesburg and studying teaching.
Okay, that's interesting. That's quite the journey. And then looking back in hindsight, do you feel like you, I don't want to call it right decision. What are your thoughts on that decision in hindsight?
I think I should first mention that during the initial stages of having made this decision, I regretted having made the decision because, yeah, no, I have to be honest with you. So I went back, right? I don't know what prompted this. I went back on the internet and I searched, because after high school, I didn't really show much interest in how much certain careers were earning, you know, but
yeah.
But then, yeah, I went back and then I Googled.
Yeah.
And then after seeing that package, the
gap,
the salary, the gap is it's way too much. So after that, I did regret making the decision. But then I think going back and remembering just how depressed and miserable I felt, because I felt as though I wasn't in the right path. I wasn't fulfilling my purpose. And reading Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Because that's why I got introduced to this whole idea of purpose, right? Having something that you have to do, having a calling, and seeing what he terms omens, seeing all these signs that reassure you that the stars are indeed aligned, and having everything work just so perfectly, lining up. I thought to myself, you know what? At this point, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much I'll be earning, as long as I'm happy and fulfilled doing whatever it is I'll be doing. So, yeah, reading did help me a lot. Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where he mentions the fact that it's not how much you're making, it's what you do with what you're making.
Yeah.
These seemingly little principles from different books helped me stay focused.
Yeah.
So yes, immediately after making the decision, I did regret having changed. But then later on, after arming myself with all this knowledge and all these ideas, it helped me focus on everything I was doing at the time. So much so that getting to the University of Johannesburg, I, after registering, went straight to class because I missed the first year's orientation. I went straight to class. I sat down in the front row. I still remember it vividly as if it was yesterday. I went to class, sat down in the first row, took my book out of my bag, placed it on the desk, placed my pen right next to the book, and just sat like this, waiting for the lecturer. And Nelson was sitting right next to me. the guy I came from the University of the
Yes.
Witwatersrand with. And he looked at me, he's like, "Hey, man, you're so focused, you don't even see that people are here. You don't even see me." I'm like, yo, I actually didn't realize we'd be in the same class because he chose different majors. He chose mathematics and physics. So I became so focused that I forgot everything else. It went back to my high school years where it was just school, home, church. That was it. So yeah, I did regret the decision momentarily. And then later on, I became content. And I think that's the most important thing to me, being content, being happy, and enjoying the process and appreciating what the process teaches you. We take for granted what we learn throughout the process of becoming, right? And for me, that's the most important thing, the process itself.
That's interesting. And you see, I think for me, again, I think our upbringings are very different. Like my parents are still together and whatever else. But I think for me, and I even tell this to my younger siblings and whatever, so I say to them, as a man, I think you ought to have two dreams. And I really believe this. I said to them, you have to have two dreams. If you decide to have a family, you ought to have two dreams. First being the life you want to give to your family and what you want to do with your life. And if what you want to do with your life cannot give your family the life you want for them, then find a way to do what you want to do with your life in your spare time. You understand? So that's literally my take. That's
Yeah.
because especially where kids are concerned, like I've got young kids, and my take on it is you lose your right to put yourself first the day you decided to have them. You understand? Because out of all the people in this situation, they didn't choose to be here. They are the ones that did not have a say in what's happening right now. And so you have to then put them first, you know.
True.
And for me, that's where a lot of my thoughts on money and finances actually come in, you know, like it's one of the things that I really, I think about a lot, like more than perhaps I probably should, and more often than perhaps I would want to admit, but I think about it a lot, but I think about it within that context, within the context of they didn't ask to be here. They didn't ask for this. And so you want to actually set them up in the best possible way, you know, and then you can decide on what it is that you want to do or what you find interesting when you have time, you know, in your spare time, you know, but set your family up properly. And it's one of the things that I really think about a lot. And now with that, I think a lot of that also has to do with the people that have influenced me and the people that I've met. Now, where I want to go with this is more in relation to the shift a few gears towards the education system and what actually drives that. What are your current thoughts on where our education as it is right now? What are your thoughts on it right now? And where do you think it's going? And is it moving in the right direction?
So I read an article yesterday, actually, a Times Live article by Jonathan Jansen, where he mentions, and I think that this is where my answer will come from. We need to look at what the department deems the best individuals they can produce, right? In order to measure whether or not we are actually where we need to be, or if we are headed in the right direction. So in this article, Jonathan Jansen mentions how that a whole lot of individuals that come out of high school with distinctions and go into university experience a whole lot of difficulty. and taking myself as a case study, I can see exactly how that can be. For me, I don't want to blame the department, right? I believe in being accountable, like taking responsibility for my own life. But at the same time, it would be remiss of us to talk about what the department should do or what the department is doing wrong without looking at exactly the type of principles that are being promoted. So when we look at the education system, our education system, yeah, it leaves a lot to be desired.
Okay.
Individuals come out of high school not having the proper skill set to navigate not only the working world, but life itself. We have the likes of life orientation, but we need to stop and ask ourselves, does it really prepare our children for what's out there? Especially having moved into the 4IR and having artificial intelligence being implemented in almost every sector. So yeah, that's my take. It leaves a lot to be desired, and I think we should stop putting the blame on the department only, but also look at ourselves and see what we are promoting. There's a whole lot of parents who come from work tired and barely ever have enough time to instill that interest in their children. I think after having done practicals I was doing my practicals in a school called Curo Helderweg.
Okay.
And yeah, speaking to those students opened my eyes. Almost all of them were complaining about how their parents don't have time for them. And how, okay, let me not say too much, but there's a lot we need to look at other than the schooling system itself. There's a lot of truth in that saying, it takes a village to raise a child, right? So I watched the previous interview you did, and the gentleman mentioned how that context is important. It's so true. Context is important. So if we bring it back to the African context, in order to solve our problems, educational problems in this instance, we will need to look at context. We will need to look at how that when children go back home, there rarely ever is enough motivation being instilled in them to study. And some of them, if not most of them, come from homes where it's not even conducive for them to study, right? And so if we are to ever solve the educational woes, the educational problems we're experiencing, we will need to look at this issue holistically. And yeah, watching the matric results announcement yesterday, yeah, there are all these figures being mentioned by the minister and how there's an improvement here and there. But can we really speak of improvement when we've lowered the standards? Can we really be honest with ourselves and say, no, we've improved, such and such a province has achieved this percentage and they've improved? I don't think we can be honest with ourselves if we are lowering the standards and yet speak of an improvement. Where does it come from? It doesn't add up, right? So I think for me, it goes back to context and the idea that we are all involved in this. We can't just blame a department or an individual for the problems we're experiencing today.
So when I think about, I agree with a lot of what you're saying in terms of the the problem is multifaceted. So there are many factors that influence a child's outcome. Like you can literally, like even in terms of neighborhood, like you can literally, the neighborhood that you more often than not, the neighborhood that you actually grow up in plays a larger predictive factor in your results in school than even at times things like IQ. You know, like it's very, very, when you look at like some of the studies, it's very interesting what actually tends to influence a child's outcome in school in and of itself. And a lot of that has to do with things like identity, what they believe is true about themselves. And that often indeed comes from, more often than not, the household that they come from. What that household actually believes to be true about education in and of itself. What does that household actually propagate about education? And so, I mean, and for me, how I actually think about it, this is why I try to push most of my kids into private schooling. You know, like that's really what I've decided, because one can argue like, well, we've got, you know, one kid from some rural school who's got 7 distinctions. You're like, yes, but how many of them failed? You know, so what I do is that I look at the majority. I'm like, I'm not going to assume that my child is actually exceptional. I'm going to assume that my child is average, which means they are going to perform to the general average of the environment that they are in. And so if and this is literal basic things where you can look at the average student coming out of a private school, at the very minimum has university entrance. That's not the same as the average student coming out of a public school, you know? So it's like, the averages are not even the same. Like you're not even measuring the same population. You're not even measuring the same dynamics. And for whatever reason, like the environment that you grew up in, the school that you go to plays such a huge role. And it's one thing that, who's this? The father of, he basically is dubbed the father of genetics, where he talks about the idea of nature and nurture and how the two things actually influence each other. And I think that is where, I was talking to the missus about this a while back. What most parents tend to do, and I don't understand why we do this, we actually don't want to take responsibility for our kids' futures. It's easier to blame the teacher. Like, it's not like your child fails. Like, there is no child that failed in the matric final exam. They've been failing through the entire year. You shouldn't be shocked at what happened yesterday. What happened yesterday is the result of what has been happening for, let's say, let's give it at least 12 months. And you didn't do anything about it. So you cannot look at the result and say, how did my child fail? The education system is failing my child. You're like, well, yes, but you also failed the child too. You know, because this child was not going to do well in that exam to begin with. Like the standard is almost irrelevant. It's like this child was not going to do well going into that exam. This child was ill prepared going in. So if you as a parent were nervous about what's going to be happening yesterday, you're like, it's a bit too late. You know, you know, it's a bit too late. And I want to place more blame on parents, but I also can't, because I think parents are also ill prepared when it comes to their children's education.
True.
You understand? So I think it's easy for us to also, you know, yes, it's true that it takes a village to raise a child. You know, raising a child and training up a child are not the same thing. When we're talking about education, we're talking about training up the child. We're talking about developing the child so that they can actually become a meaningful member in society. That training requires a certain level of, firstly, an actual interest in the child, but also a greater focus on what are their weaknesses, what are their strengths, how can we actually help them and help them develop in that. And that's a multifaceted issue. That involves both the education system, that involves both the community that this child grows up in. And I do not think we do enough of that. I do not think we do enough of helping these students in terms of that. Because when you, I mean, if someone who didn't take school seriously like me, you know, can come out relatively okay, you know, clearly school is not that difficult. You know, like more often than not, it's really, again, you mentioned the thing of interest, like they're just not interested in schooling. Why is that? Like, what actually drives that? What's causing that? And it's one of the things that I think about quite often, one relating to my own little family, but even in the context of, I've got siblings still in school and whatever else. So I think about it holistically, and I'm like, okay, what am I doing to try and encourage that? What am I doing? I've got one younger sibling who wants to get into engineering. I'm like, okay, it's a difficult path, but I try to show him some of the amazing things that some engineers have actually accomplished. Introducing to people like your Elon Musks and whatever else, and like you said, this is what engineering does. This is what an engineer can actually do in terms of impact. And some of them are. One of my siblings is so interested in money and becoming rich. So you actually are able to. There's this idea where people say, well, money won't make you a millionaire. That can't possibly be true. You become a specialist in, let's say, a surgeon and whatever else, and all of a sudden you're making 1.5 million a year. It can make you a millionaire. That is that. But those are things that generally they aren't actually taught and they aren't influenced in terms of that. And so my next question to you is related to, I think, the parents themselves. Your mother seems to have been able to do it relatively well. What do you perhaps feel like your mom did well in terms of one, encouraging, but also instilling that desire towards learning that perhaps other parents may not be doing in terms of their kids? I understand the notion of kids feeling like their parents are not busy and they're not giving them enough attention. And fair enough, you have to put food on the table, and you talk about your mom also being busy. But you also talk about how much of an impact that she did have, So it's like, yes, she was busy, but in those moments that you did spend with her, they seem to have a great impact on your life and also in the trajectory of your schooling and your academic achievements. What do you think she actually got right in those space? Because I think in a school, let's say, for instance, like Cura and whatever else, that is exactly what these parents need to hear. Because they don't have the time. They can't spend 5 hours a day with their kid. They've got maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or an hour or 2 hours with the kid, similar to perhaps the amount of time your mom had with you. But it seemed to have worked where you are concerned. What did your mom get right?
There's a lot we take for granted, right? And I think when it comes to parenting, we take for granted the fact that it starts early. Starting early is important. And I will go back to what this other guy in high school said to me. His name is Herbert Dema. He used to say to me, look at starting a project as the activation energy of a reaction. So when a reaction starts off, a chemical reaction starts off, it needs an activation energy. It's a lot, right? Needs a lot of energy. But depending on the chemical reaction. But once that energy is invested into the reaction, it takes off. So whenever you have to start a task, start small, start wherever. Even if you are writing an essay, start with the heading, work on the heading and the introduction. Even if it takes you a week to work on the introduction, you've started, right? And I think we can use that analogy in parenting as well. So I think what my mother did well was to start early. I mentioned how that she used to buy, she wasn't earning much. She still isn't earning much. But whatever little she got, she would buy things that would arouse interest. Instead of buying useless toys, she would buy those type of toys that would help me learn, right? She bought a whole lot of books, encyclopedias and literature books I mentioned. So I think that's the key. Start early, right? And I'll go back to the Bible as well, where it says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it, right? So when you show your child what to do, not only tell them what to do, but you also live out the example. I mean, my mother would wake up every morning without fail, around 4, 5, she'd be up reading in the kitchen. So seeing that and seeing that determination and that discipline, this lady doesn't have much, but she still manages to raise her kids. She still manages, she doesn't have much time, she doesn't have much money, but she still manages with the little that she has. If she can do it, everyone can do it. That's what I thought to myself. So seeing my mother do these things, these seemingly little things, it motivated me to also want to accomplish and use the same principles that she's using in my education. So to say to myself, if my mother can wake up at this time and read, I can do that. So I also started early. So it all boils down to what your children see you do. Not only what you do for them, but what you do for yourself, right? Because you can't give what you don't have.
Yeah.
You can only give out of abundance, right? So if you've already have certain principles down, then your children are most likely to follow you. So there are some parents who might say, okay, start early, sharp, but I don't have the time. Like I don't have the liberty of going back in time and changing certain things. No one does. But what you can do now is to slowly but surely change the habits, right? It starts small, but it builds up. Once they see you suddenly change and gear up, they will also want to gear up, right? We take for granted also what impact we have in our children's lives. There are so many stories we've read and seen of criminals who would say to you, I saw my mother do this, or perpetrators of GBV say to you, I saw my father hit my mother, and so that's where it came from, right? So if an action so negative as perpetrating GBV can have such a great impact, how much an action that's positive? So why don't we switch it? Why don't we channel our energies into something positive? If you can come back from work, take a young shower, go and speak to your child, ask them how their day was. It starts small. Once they see you showing interest in their lives and actually caring what happened during their day, instead of working your way on your laptop every now and then, they will sort of become accustomed to that, and will see that my parent cares, and so I should also care for myself. So yeah, it starts small.
Interesting. Another thing, I think we're going to start wrapping up now. Another thing that I have a question for you about, and I don't know how to fix this, but well, firstly, provided that one thinks it's a problem, I think it's a problem. So they say that like the average toddler, so anything between 3 and let's say 5, asks about 400 to 700 questions a day. And it's quite annoying. I've got a kid who just turned 4 on Sunday, and he asks why about everything. Like, why this? Why do we have to bath every day? Why do I have to go to school every day? Why is that happening? Why are they driving that? Where's that motorbike going? Like, how am I supposed to know? But it seems as though as soon as the kids enter the education system, those number of questions drop dramatically. And it drops to the point of basically reaching 0 a day. Now, here's my thinking. And I actually had a fight with, because he started a new school, I had a fight with the principal about this as well. Kids ask questions because they want to know. Until they realize when you get to school, it's the child it's not the child that asks the questions, it's the child that answers the right questions that gets the gold star. So they stop asking questions and they start wondering, what do you want me to know so that I can also get a gold star? Which is fair enough in a world that doesn't change. Where if you can just take what I'm telling you, learn what I'm telling you, and be able to repeat it to me, you'll be fine and you'll get your gold star. Until you get into the real world, and now all of a sudden, the world that you were taught by a teacher in grade 10 is not the world you're moving into now. Turns out that we don't need that many CAs anymore. A lot of the work that accountants used to do can now be automated by an app, but you studied the accounting, you did all of this, but you now all of a sudden don't know how to ask the right questions that can now update the information that you now need in order for you to actually make forward progress in your life and career. So it's like the way in which you succeed in education seems to be the way in which you fail in real life.
That's deep. Yeah.
Firstly, okay, if that is true, why is it that we've set up our education the way that we've set it up? Because you see, we were fine up until about 2 years ago, and then all of a sudden we're faced with a disease or a virus where now all of a sudden we needed people who could ask good questions to say, okay, what is this thing actually doing? How is it actually functioning? It seems to be moving differently to what we've ever seen before. So how do we do that? So now all of a sudden, it's not the person with the right answers. It's the person who can actually ask the interesting questions that we needed. And clearly we did not have enough of those people. And we didn't ask those good questions quickly enough, clearly. So it's like we literally have just been through something. And still, I guess we're still reeling through something where the way in which we've trained up our kids, the way in which we've actually educated them, set us up for actual failure in an instance where we needed people who could ask good questions. Why is it that within the structure, firstly, I think that's that's where we can start with this. Why is it that we reward the answers and not the questions? If clearly in the real world, I mean, even in corporate, that's really what it is. The person that can really ask good questions, take into account certain aspects that perhaps no one else is looking at, and be confident enough to raise those questions, be confident enough to raise those are the people that get the promotions. Those are the people that get the increases. They're like, listen, you are such a valuable member of this team. You are asking good questions. You are raising ideas that we weren't even thinking about. Those are the people that make progress in their careers. But that's not a thing we teach in their education. Why is that?
So I think for me, it stems from the idea that the schooling system seems to specialize in stifling dissent. So whenever you have an individual such as you've described, an individual who asks a whole lot of questions, they tend to kill that spirit. I don't know why, I don't know what's the motive, but I applaud anyone who comes out of the schooling system still having that level of curiosity, because the war is real. They seem to be fighting against creativity. They seem to be fighting against critical thinking. And if we take it back to the corporate world and look at the likes of H&M, if there was an individual in that boardroom who said, you know what, I think this ad is a bit racist, they would have saved themselves the embarrassment, right? So I think we need more parents like you who would actually go to the principal and say, look, I don't think such and such and such is working. My child tells me this, and this is happening. Whenever they seem to show interest in a certain topic and ask certain types of questions, they're shut down, right? And if we have more of those parents, the schooling system will have no choice but to actually ask themselves if the recipe they're using is working. And not only the parents, but the head of departments themselves. And I think it's unfortunate that, I'm going to be honest with you, né? If I take it back to, so I've just concluded my undergrad studies in education. If I take it back to everything we've been taught, this is what, it's no secret. This is what most of my classmates were complaining about. The fact that the university seems to be prescribing a certain level of critical thinking, but they don't seem to be taking it as seriously as they do on paper. So they tell you, no, you should come up with innovative ideas. But then you come up with innovative ideas and you ask the relevant questions as to whether a certain system is working, and you're shut down. There was actually a case in one of our classrooms, and these are future teachers, mind you. There was a case in our classroom where one of the students asked the lecturer whether the system she's prescribing would actually work in a different situation, in a different instance, right? Sort of avoiding to use a rule of thumb to say, okay, no, whenever this happens, this is what I apply. But to say, question the theory itself. Is this theory valid? And they were asking a valid question. And I don't know whether it was out of frustration or maybe the lecturer felt as though her authority was being questioned, but she suddenly became all sorts of emotional and threatened to actually storm out of the lecture hall, saying that she was being disrespected. But the student wasn't actually disrespectful in asking the question. Even the tone wasn't disrespectful. So I think it's unfortunate that even the teachers are having their critical thinking and creative urges stifled. So yeah, no, it's a problem with the whole system. The teachers themselves, some of them or some of us don't really know what we're doing. And we don't really understand just how much our psyche has been affected, right? And having this problem makes it a bit worse in the system itself when we perpetuate it. So we go back to the classroom and we apply the same principles we were taught. And because there's this one kid who is seemingly annoying, asking all sorts of questions, you think they're questioning your authority because you were once in a lecture hall and you asked a relevant question, but the lecturer thought you were questioning their authority. So now you tend to do the same thing because justice wasn't served way back when you asked the question. So it's that sort of problem. I think if us as new teachers were to implement a new way of thinking to say, let's sort of do away with most of what is prescribed by a behaviorist approach to teaching that says the learner knows nothing, and we are going to reward certain individuals, and we don't treat learners as, there was a term that they used to say a whole lot of times in the lecture hall, tabula rasa, meaning a blank slate, right? You don't treat learners as blank slates that come into the classroom with nothing. They know something. They can school you in a whole lot of stuff, right? Especially teaching a generation that's well-versed with using technology. They can teach you a lot. So if we start looking at ourselves not as just educators, but educators who are also students in the classroom, we will sort of get rid of that pedestal type of image of ourselves where we are the authority in the classroom. So yeah, I think it boils down to that.
That's interesting. Yeah, man. Like I think this education question is it's sad, the story that you've just mentioned. Now, having been through the undergraduate studies, and I believe now you're doing your honors,
Yes.
do you have plans of actually practicing as a teacher?
No.
Wow.
No.
Okay, let's get into that. Let's get into that. This is, I think, oh my goodness, like I really wish I could send the minister this conversation and say, this is what your training is doing.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, why is that?
So, yeah, there's a whole lot of personal reasons as to why.
Hey, we don't have to get into the personal ones.
Yeah. So, my idea with getting into teaching was that I would be, don't get me wrong, I love teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I love teaching. I love the idea of being in a classroom and actually sharing knowledge. And it's the conversations for me. The conversations are so refreshing, getting new perspectives. It's amazing. It's amazing. But having said that, I don't see myself in the classroom in the long run. Actually, I don't want to start because I don't think it's for me. I'm more interested in developing certain teaching techniques and also finding new ways of using technology in the classroom, right? So I think also it's this idea that's been planted in my head. It's been running in my head for so long of the meneer with pointed shoes, and a tucked-in shirt with no tie. That image is, it haunts me every now and then. And I didn't want to be that type of teacher who is arrogant for no reason because his dreams didn't come true or he didn't fulfill certain things in his life. I didn't want to be that teacher who's not fulfilled with what they're doing. There are people who genuinely want to be in the classroom and who find passion in standing there and engaging with the students. But for me, it's more of not feeling like I'm limited by what the HOD is prescribing. There's a whole lot of politics in schools, especially government schools. And there's a whole lot of what the principal is saying. And now you have to deal with all of this while being in the classroom and having to deal with admin. For me, that idea wasn't appealing. So I decided to branch off into something else, into instructional design, which is a growing field now. So I'm looking at sort of teaching educators how to use technology and how to sort of apply what they've learned and couple it with some of the new principles that we are now learning about technology. So that's that. I don't want to be in the classroom. No.
Fair enough. If you were to practice, what would your approach actually be? What would be the one driver of success for you if you were to actually practice? If you were actually a teacher in front of students, how would you measure whether you were being a good teacher or not?
You know, Thabiso, if I could get that one gentleman at the back of the class, or that one lady at the back of the class who thinks it's over for them, all is lost, and who think their family situation cannot be improved whatsoever. Everyone has given up on them. If I can get that one individual who's so despondent that they choose to become a distraction in class, if I can get them to believe in themselves and to actually commit themselves and to find passion in what they're doing, that would be my performance indicator. That would be where I would say, no, actually, yeah, no, I'm doing something. I'm making a difference. If I can get those type of individuals to believe in themselves and to change their course completely, that would be my level of success, my performance indicator.
That's amazing. Final question. You've got absolute power over South Africa. No one questions anything you do. It can't be objected to. You can't do anything. And whatever you say goes, and it happens instantly. And you can only change 3 things about South Africa, but it cannot benefit you personally. What would those 3 things be?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Sure. I think one, yeah, I'm opposed to that type of individual. Because that's a dictatorship.
Oh,
so,
yes, definitely.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it would draw me into a paradox, because the first thing I would want to change is my level of authority, that level of authority.
Okay.
Yeah, I would want to change the whole idea of me having the final say. I think it does no good. I think it's important for us to have opposition, and that's how we move forward. When we started the interview, you mentioned how that you realized you don't have all the answers. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason you're doing this series of dialogues, of interviews. Mm-hmm. And that's the one thing I've realized myself, that alone, I can't do much. But if I engage with others, I can accomplish a lot. So I think the one thing I would change is that level of authority. And I think having changed that, it would change everything. I wouldn't even have the liberty of making the other 2 decisions. So, yeah.
That's interesting. I've got split thoughts about dictatorships. I'm actually I'm also very opposed to them. You see. However, what I'm also opposed to is endless conversations that lead nowhere. So, in my opinion, there has to be someone who has a final say. There has to be someone who's going to bear the responsibility of, okay, I've heard all of what you've said. This is my decision. Now, in this instance, I'm going to push you on this. You've abdicated the responsibility of having that much power. Fair enough. Okay. But I'm still going to push you to have the final say. You can only, you've already used one. Now there are 2 aspects. What are those 2 core issues within South Africa where you can have as much deliberation as you feel like having, can talk to all the scientists you want to talk to, but eventually the responsibility lies with you to make the decision. What are the 2 things that you would actually change about South Africa that you think would have the greatest impact?
I'm very interested in education. So I would take it to the education sector and say, those teachers who are actually opposed to change, and which just so happens to be the older teachers of the previous generations, should be forced to learn new skills and be well conversant with technology. Otherwise, make way for the new teachers who are actually interested in developing themselves and their skill set. I would change that. The third one would be going into politics, right? Yeah, there's a whole lot that's happening, but
you're gonna need more than one wish for that.
no. No, it's a lot. So I think the one thing I would want to deal with is the level of corruption, because it is derailing our progress. So to deal with that, there's no one solution, but I would find means through which to limit instances whereby nepotism is used to appoint certain individuals, and to sort of infiltrate certain political groups that seem to have secrets within themselves, and that's why they're not holding each other accountable. I would deal with that. I don't know how, but I think I'd sort of find a system of dealing with that, such that everyone, regardless of whether or not you're a member of this party and for how long you've been a member of this party, is held accountable for the wrongs that they do, so that we move forward. We can't be in a country where certain individuals are more equal than others, right? Because it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
The level of corruption is just unbearable now. It's gotten to a point where I actually think maybe there should be a budget just for corruption, so that we prepare ourselves ahead of time, because it's too much.
Yeah. No, man, fair enough, fair enough. TJ, thank you for this. I think your story is very interesting, and I think it will really resonate with a segment of people that tend to watch my videos. I think your story is, it's not unique. I think there are many people that have been through similar instances, similar circumstances in their educational journey, where they've reached multiple crossroads that feel like it's a crossroad every like 3 or 4 months. Like just when you feel like, okay, I've gotten over this, and then now it's a new thing. I've just gotten over this, and then it's a new thing altogether. And also within our development. So I really, I appreciate that. I really appreciate you taking the time to really sit down with me and actually just share your journey. And man, we are watching, like we're really, I'm watching your journey, and I'm really intrigued by it. I'm really intrigued by the journey you're taking. I'm intrigued by some of the decisions you've taken and whatever. I was like, some of them isn't decisions that I would have made, but I'm intrigued by how you've made those decisions, how you've made it work for you, how you've dealt with some of the feelings of failure, how you've dealt with basically someone you really look up to disappointing you, and realizing just how much of yourself and what you believe to be true about yourself is linked to the image of that person you actually have. I think we can all resonate with that. We've all had people like that, whether it be our parents and whatever else, and then you wake up one day and you realize they're not perfect, and you're like, so what the hell does that mean? So and now having to deal with all of that, I think your story is a unique one, and I'm pretty sure this is just the beginning, and we'll definitely love to have you sit down with us again when you're further along in your journey, talk again about where you're at now, what your thoughts are, whether it be within the context of education, whether now you've moved into technology completely, which it sounds like you're in that direction. It really does sound. But yeah, really, I appreciate you taking the time to really sit down with us, and thank you for this. Like, I think it's really been quite informative, and some of your ideas are really, you've said some of the things that I think some of us have been thinking, but hearing it from someone who's actually been on the inside with regards to education, you're like, okay, so we are not crazy. This is actually what's happening. I mean, you don't necessarily have to have the answers as to how we fix that, but this is exactly what the point of this sit downs are. It's the thought experiment. We're going to look at certain ideas, certain thoughts. We don't have to arrive at a certain conclusion, but just digging deeper into those questions, and people can make of it what they wish. And I really appreciate some of the ideas and you being so open with us about your own journey.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Thabiso. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to watching a whole lot of your videos and the other interviews.
Yeah.
The other interviews we get to do.
Yeah.
You inspire me. You inspire me. I hope you know that. I hope you know that every time you decide to sit in front of your laptop and record those videos, I'm listening, I'm watching, and more often than not, it's with a smile on my face because I'm thinking, damn, this man is smart. This man is a thinker. So I hope you know that. And yeah, every time you talk about Jordan Peterson, I think to myself, I actually watch his videos on YouTube, and this is exactly what he says. So I'm also watching. I'm also watching.
I appreciate that, man. I really appreciate that. I hope to be able to sit down with Jordan Peterson one day. I think he's easily in the top 3 most important voices on the planet right now, in my opinion. Like, he's more important than some presidents. That is a value treasure that we all need to look after. TJ, let me not keep you any longer. Thank you so much for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome,
Thank you
man.
so much.
Cool.